Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 10 of Beers with VCs, where we have casual conversations about the less talked about aspects of venture capital and startup building. We are your hosts, Sabrina Passman and Simon Lancaster, and today we are thrilled to be joined by Tyler Mincy. He started his career as a mechanical engineer, and after earning his stripes at Apple in the iPod iPhone days, founding a consumer electronics startup, investing at the intersection of the digital and physical at Bolt, he is now founding partner at Baukunst. Tyler, welcome to the podcast. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks for having me. This is great to see you guys.
Yeah. Okay, we'll start off. What's everyone drinking? I'll start with probably the most boring. I just have a generic cider today. So nothing too exciting.
We'll try to give a little more detail. So I'm also drinking cider. We did not coordinate this.
Oh, bougie.
This is Square Mile Cider from Portland, Oregon. We picked this up when we went skiing on Mount Hood over the winter break. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing that it's still in the fridge. Like, we haven't drank it in the last month, but I've got two lined up for today. So
nice. Making your way through.
Cider day. Tyler.
Awesome. Well, this year I decided to do dry January, but then the week after New Year's was too fun. So I decided to postpone my dry January start till the January 10th or something. So I'm trying to make it to second week in February-ish. So I just have a delicious Lagunitas hop water.
Nice. Solid. I've never had it before.
Zero proof?
Yep.
Interesting. I haven't tried those yet.
That's great. It's almost like my favorite flavor of sparkling water now.
Beer flavored.
Is it just like the hint of grapefruit, but instead it's a hint of hoppiness beer?
Yep.
Oh,
really?
Dope, actually.
Yep. Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's really great.
Okay.
It's definitely citrusy.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if they actually describe the hop strain on here or not, but
adding it
feels like a little citrus. It's got a little bit of
citrusy, little hoppy.
Yeah, I love
it.
That's
Nice. Good
awesome.
choice. Okay. Also, I have to say the 30-second countdown, it still hasn't grown old on me. Like, the first time we tried it, I thought I would get annoyed by it pretty quickly, but every time it pumps me up. So I'm ready for this one. It's going to be a good one.
Woo! I totally
And it
agree.
is me, Simon Lancaster, even though I've cut my hair to a tenth of the length. Still not clone myself yet. Okay, get started.
Let's do it. Tyler, you have such an incredible background, and I would love to go through your origin story of what led you to start Baukunst.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll give you the slightly longer chronological version because I think it'll actually connect to some themes for Baukunst too. But all my pieces of paper from school say mechanical engineering on them. I studied control systems design, which often leads to many different things. So I was doing lots of CAD for mechanisms and robots, but then I needed to learn some electronics design to integrate sensors and build circuit boards and learn how to choose microcontrollers and write low-level software to implement controllers and actually then figure out how to use those things. So I kind of ended up with this grab bag of kind of electromechanical software experience kind of through school. I also was a TA at the Smart Product Design Lab at Stanford and really just loved through that process, facilitating teams of people doing that kind of work. And so it kind of led me on a path to being more of a kind of technical product manager, product manager for kind of some of the early roles in my career, because I didn't really want to commit to one of the specific engineering disciplines and get super deep into that. I really kind of loved the macro problem of everyone doing that work together and figuring out the right things to work on. But also during the same time as the academic stuff, I've always been super into digital art. I was doing kind of a lot of digital photo and digital video stuff. I was working with some very large screen display walls back at Princeton, where some people were looking at some of the first pictures from the Mars rovers in full resolution. It was you couldn't do that without a big display wall at the time. Some fun stuff with that. And also have always been really into music. I did a lot of college radio. I DJ'd at a pirate radio station here in San Francisco for a while, and kind of always had that part, creative part of my life as well.
No, I had no idea. That's so unique.
Yeah, totally. It's fun. I think those things were a big part of kind of shaping who I was. So I've always liked places where all those things come together, and a lot of kind of product design is putting together those parts of your brain. And so that was kind of the path that I ended up following early on in my career. But yeah, so I ended up at Apple back in the mid 2000s and joined when it was sort of just the iPod team there, and it was a little bit of like a wink, wink, nod to what kind of the Black Ops project that was happening at the time, which was the first phone. So I ended up being the like lead EPM on the touchscreen for the first phone, and kind of shepherding that through most of the development of the program through launch, and that was really just an amazing combination of everything from industrial design to UI to the low level engineering, and then figuring out how to make the first mass produced multi-touch screen in the world. And so spent lots of time in Asia piecing together and really designing a supply chain for scratch around that product with an amazing team. I got to manage a few iPod programs from start to finish, and was actually managing kind of the full product roadmap, the Shuffle Nano Classic and Touch at the time, kind of the end of my time there. So just a really special time to be at the company when Steve was still around, and really, we were truly operating like a startup inside the larger company at the time too. Like when I started, we still like stood up in a conference room and introduced ourselves to like everybody working on the handheld devices at the time, which was pretty wild. So obviously, a really like formative time in my life there. I had a little bit of like a needle scratch moment in my career then, where my dad actually went through some health issues at the time, and he's doing much better now. But I really had to kind of take a beat to like try to decide to reconnect with other kind of friends and family in my life. And that was also when those products at Apple were really shifting to kind of like shipping every 2 to 3 years instead of every year, which was the right thing for the company, but felt like my personal growth was starting to like plateau there a little bit too. So I just sort of did the thing that I've done a few times in my career too, where I went and tried to find the most like talented people who trusted me enough to like let me do a job that I was barely qualified for, and ended up becoming a partner at this digital agency in New York called Fictive Kin, just doing web apps and mobile apps, and really just got deep in kind of UI UX design, branding, software development. Because I figured like the whole like internet thing and mobile apps were like going to be an important skill to pick up at the time. And yeah, we had this really interesting model where we would partner with clients who were looking to incubate or sometimes like launch a new company, and would develop products from start to launch and initial customer support. And oftentimes things that worked, like when we would help sometimes hire a GM or a CEO and loan some of our engineering or design team, and help them raise VC money too. So that was really when I truly started cutting my teeth kind of in the startup ecosystem. During that time, we also ran a conference called Brooklyn Beta, which was a kind of a big designer developer conference that ran for 5 years. And 1 year we raised a kind of a small fund to run an accelerator program there. So that was like technically the first fund I ran at the time too. And it was just, an amazing experience that kind of got me hooked on startups for life. Ended up moving back to the Bay Area as part of the founding team of a company called Pearl that was in the automotive space with some ex-Apple people, where we were building hardware software systems for the automotive aftermarket that could conceptually be building blocks for autonomous driving, but people could add on to their kind of car without buying a new vehicle, that could give them some driver assistance features that could kind of start the machine learning flywheel around developing like smart car systems. That was a really amazing experience. I was the VP of product and kind of got to see the company from the very beginning, when nobody was taking salaries, to Series C, and really saw the company grow during that time. Lots of lessons learned that probably fall outside of the scope of the podcast, but was a really amazing experience. And then in 2017, I was looking for kind of a new gig, and it just so happened that I'd spoke at a couple conferences with the partners at Bolt. That was a connected hardware fund at the time, and they were on the cusp of launching their third fund cycle. It was a kind of 2x bigger fund than their fund two, and we're opening up a new facility here in San Francisco. And there was an opportunity to join as their VP of engineering, and they had a little bit of a hybrid support model at the time, where portfolio companies, like in addition to just getting the financial capital, would get support from a full-time engineering team at the fund that would help with hiring and kind of design reviews, and occasionally doing direct engineering work as well too, but almost acting like a staff engineer would at a larger company. So I got to join a VC fund as the VP of engineering, so which isn't even a title that exists in most places.
Seriously, that's incredibly unique.
Yeah, so that was amazing. And yeah, over the course of a couple of years, I kind of ended up finding myself as more of a partner track person on the investment team. I was, I think, sourcing a lot of founders out of my network, and I was just interested in getting involved in as much of the kind of diligence and company building process as possible, not just in product development too. So that was kind of a natural evolution. A couple of years ago, like a group of us kind of decided to spin a new fund out called Balkans that we just launched kind of officially in the fall of 2022. So we're just a little over a year into the investment period. And yeah, so I just met an incredible group of people and had exposure to an investment model that was a really good fit for me personally. I think at Balkans, we are a pre-seed lead investor. So we're oftentimes the first institutional investor in the companies we back. And we get to work with a relatively small number of companies, which means we can truly be collaborative company building partners with them, and not just kind of in contrast to early stage models where you try to place as many small bets as possible and mostly passive, but try to get involved with what sticks later on. So that's a really great fit for my interest for the stage of companies I like to work with, and then a business model that really lets me spend meaningful amounts of time with people.
That's incredible. You've had such varied, like basically every possible type of experience you could have inside of the engineering and startup worlds. I feel like you like were from big tech to startup, founding your own startup, to like VP engineering at Bolt, to partner at Bolt. How did all of these experiences help you really narrow in on your thesis at Balkans?
Yeah, for Balkans, I mean, I really was kind of approaching it from a blank canvas. I feel incredibly fortunate to be in the position where I had the partners and the opportunity to start a new fund and really approach a thesis from scratch. Some important components for me were, one, the stage we invest in. Like when you're starting early on, like you really don't want to be narrowly defined on a specific industry or a specific technology, because those two do end up being cyclical. And once something has a name and there's like a conference about it, like that's too late for a pre-seed investor. That's already like a mature category. We're really in the business of spotting those future categories. And so instead of that focus, I really wanted to be focused on a specific demographic or kind of archetype of founder, really. And so for me, like that's just sort of like I wanted to key into my people and lean into my strengths too. So those people that are deeply technical but bring an expertise for design, like I usually call them creative technologists. Some different people filter that kind of archetype through different labels. But that those creative technologists for me are the people that I have a deep network in, and I think are uniquely equipped to identify opportunities in markets, and then also build really great capital efficient companies too. So that was really the core of the thesis and what I wanted to center the fund around and invest in.
I love the theme of creative technologist. It's incredibly unique. And I think given the background, I feel like people would expect you to be only a deep tech investor, for example, because you have so much experience in that world. Describe what creative technologist means outside of the realm of deep tech.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think there's some, like if I was going to make a mood board of deep tech, it's all like nuclear reactors and like Star Trek. And it's maybe this like, a slightly sometimes like dystopian leaning future that I don't really know that I want to be a part of necessarily, or I'm like, that sounds valuable, but is that really going to be good? And I think for me, the component that a lot of those technology conversations are missing is really like a vision of the future that I want to be a part of. And so that's like the missing kind of the creativity or the design component for me. I think for me, a creative technologist is someone who really starts from vision and like paints and illustrates a picture of a world we all want to live in, and works backwards for like what are the right technologies to get us there, and how do we build towards that specific experience. It kind of goes back to some of the product design fundamentals that I believe in too. And I think people that are approaching company building in the same way are people that I want to back too. So for me, like the pure deep tech like is not always like the world, the universe that I want to be a cheerleader for. But I think people that are creative technologists can oftentimes like tell a more inspirational story that I think guides work well.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you draw the parallel between product design and company building. I think in general, a very like obvious connection, but I like the idea of the future itself being exciting of what the company is actually creating. I think so often, especially in deep tech, people are technology first. And they're like, okay, this is a really cool technology and I really want to see this in something. Don't know what it is yet, but like whatever the future is, it's going to be a good one. But I like that you're completely combating that. Actually, it's like you shouldn't start with just product or just tech being exciting. It needs to be like, is it building the future in the way that the world should actually be going?
Right. It's all like that. It's all the demo culture stuff, right? Like we all is the exact same thing we all did at Apple too, right? It was all about the demo and then moving mountains to make that demo a reality. That's like the exact same approach.
Yeah.
It is hard though as an engineer to look away from the shiny thing. It is hard. Like as we work with venture partners and experts to help us vet startups, like it's really hard to get us, like we're all actually here mechanical engineers, and sometimes we rely on even more technical people. So do you have any tips or strategies for, I think we've talked a lot of times already on this podcast about founder for especially early stage. Like it's really, really important to be focused on the founder, on vetting the founder, and not necessarily the prototype. So how do you balance that, and how do you force that?
For sure. I mean, it's definitely an and thing, not an or thing too, right? Like you do want to be an expert in technology as well, because that's your design palette, right? I think you really just want to be kind of vision and design led, and then really have a deep understanding of the technology so that you can execute that well and evaluate the trade-offs appropriately too. But you need to have both. If you have one without the other, then it's not a recipe for success.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. So would you identify as a generalist VC in Bumpcosts?
I say that sometimes because of what that means to people. I think when people like we have companies in the portfolio that are both consumer and enterprise. We have a lot of different underlying technologies in different markets that kind of cover everything from sustainability to collaborative design tools to digital manufacturing. So I think in the way that people use that term, we are generalist investors. But I think we are very like focused and opinionated about what we invest in. And I think when you look at everything in aggregate, there's a very like Balkunsty feel to all of our portfolio companies when you see them together.
Yeah, and I like that. In the realm of VC, the typical mentality is like it's either generalist and spray and pray, or it's niche and very curated. But it sounds like the way that you're building Boundcounts is a curated generalist firm, which I'm having such a hard time wrapping my head around. Like, how do you even go about, I guess, like finding deals, or how do you focus? Like, what is the underlying way that you go about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sourcing, I mean, we are very network driven in our sourcing. So it's all about the people. Like we talk about people flow as much as deal flow many times too, right? Because once it's a company and they're pitching, that's sometimes too late for us to invest. I think for many of our companies, we're investing at company formation. Like we're sort of like waiting for the incorporation docs to clear before we like wire money sometimes too. Awesome. It's kind of at that stage really. So we really have to be people focused. So it's really all about scouring those networks of really kind of smart, interesting thinkers, like tuning in to their sort of areas of inquiry, what they're excited about, kind of asking them like, hey, what are the most interesting people that what are they excited about? What are they working on? Kind of just like following those threads is a big like sourcing strategy for us. I think we've made 14 investments to date out of the fund, and I think last time we looked, all of those either came from people that were like kind of directly associated with the collective itself, or were like secondary connections from them too. So so we're very much kind of network focused in our sourcing.
The idea of network flow is so interesting. I think to an extent, we've been at Omni trying to build our network in a way that is curated and crafted to be pre-positioned to have very good startup potential. But the fact that you're doing that, but in a generalist way, like it doesn't necessarily matter what area the idea is. It's basically just top thought leaders in spaces generally, I guess. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And really, when we were designing Baukunst, our goal is to be a collective of creative technologists first that like has a fund too. So, right. So it's really about getting those people together. The word itself means the art of building in German. It's kind of one of those fun German compound words. Bau is the same as building. It's the same like root as Bauhaus, and Kunst is like art or craft, depending on how you translate it. And that there's just so much in that name for us. That's like exactly like the brand essence of a name that I like, because that really captures what it's like to to build a company in the early days. It's a little bit more art than science, a little bit more intuition than data. But as a group, like we really approach the art of building as a discipline that requires practice, and we sort of believe in advancing the art of building over time, and really sharing how we do that as a group too. So and so that's been a little bit of a just kind of unifying mission of getting everybody together, and a big part of what we do. So we do spend a lot of time doing kind of side projects or events where we get people together and like share some of the stories of like from being in the trenches and what they're working on, or things that are interesting to them, or even just giving talks that are not even stories of companies yet, but just like areas of inquiry that have been kind of like sparking interest for them, things like that, and do a fair amount of collaborations that are sort of like non-commercial on the side as well too, and those are all things that we just sort of find, I think, authentically interesting as builders ourselves. And I think when you stay true to that, and that just like it ends up being like a center of gravity that like sucks more people in.
The snowballing effect, I think, is something that we have been feeling even from the sides. It sounds like that, looking at the portfolio that you guys have curated so far, it's really interesting to see the common thread between them. And one question I have though, just so we ourselves are a niche VC, and I think everyone's been hyping up the fact that like 2024 is going to be the year of the niche VC. And I think the reason why is because it's a much clearer path to be able to, I guess, find patterns and replicate and narrow in and become better in a strategy that you're focusing on. With what you're describing, it's almost like, how do you become better at being creative consistently and well? Like, it's such an amorphous concept. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot in that. I mean, I think if for anybody's creative practice, like you can't force it, it's about having some rhythm to the work, right? Where it's a combination of like deep dives and exploratory free exploration, and like going on walks is like the best way to be creative sometimes, instead of like sitting at the desk all the time as well. So, I think just keeping that in mind, like one of the things we talk about a lot is trying to defend against extreme efficiency to give ourselves like explicit time to like play and explore. And I think that's a really important part of it. But also for us, like I love this job and want to be doing it for a long time. My partner Axel's been doing this for 3 decades now too. And so like we really take a long view to what we're building at Baukunst. And when we look at like the other funds that have done well historically, they're mostly generalist funds too. And so we really want to be building a long-term institution. And so that feels like an obvious strategy that we want to grow into. I think sometimes the like over specification, there may be some like short-term opportunities around that, but what those trends are always going to be revolving. And if you want to be relevant for the long term, like you have to have a structure that like can ride those trends, but then kind of rotates through them and has muscle memory around deciding and cluing into those new trends if you're going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, it's like crafting an adaptability strategy. It's like how to learn to be adaptable in the right ways for the new changing markets.
Exactly. And
That's
for
so-
me, for like personally, that is like always a goal. Like what I want to be good at is new things. And so like I'm always trying to like get better about doing new things well. And that's about like finding the right people, learning really quickly, being empathetic, being open to feedback, evolving rapidly. Like there's some real like skills to being good at that.
Yeah. Walk me through the collective mentality and why is the community aspect so important for what you're building?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of it kind of came from like want as much as opportunity too. I mean, we were the fund was like a pandemic baby too, and so I think we were a little bit starved for some of the community and personal connection, and so. I think like part of our image or our vision is to try to make what feels like a decentralized studio or kind of a smaller group of people. So we don't really aspire to like having like a giant community, but just kind of a smaller group of trusted people that can like share the messy kind of like raw nerves, private work in progress and get support from each other. And so that kind of like feeling is what we're looking to do. But with a group of people that are like mostly busy doing work and not like trying to like chat all the time, but are there to like cheer on real impactful work and help each other along the way too. So that was really important. And then also like we wanted Balcones to be all of our advisors and all the founders in the portfolio, not just like the investment team and the GP too. That was just kind of like the organization and brand we wanted to work towards, and have that have that mean something and be meaningful, to everyone that's a part of it.
Tyler, how it sounds great, but it also sounds idealistic for me, like for us, a small team, trying to wrangle a broader, loosely knit together team of advisors or venture partners, whatever. Really curious, like, do you have any tips on that? And how do you kind of keep the cohesiveness, keep people interested and excited when they're not actually involved in the day-to-day?
Yeah. Definitely designing some programmatic things that accommodate a lot of people's interests, because there's just a lot of different types of people that you might want to have involved, or like we like to have involved. Like there's some people that are maybe like between gigs and actually have like a lot of time and are searching for a new thing to jump into, potentially found something themselves. There's some people like very, very late in their careers who are really motivated by like connecting to an earlier generation of entrepreneurs or providing some like really specific like subject matter expertise. And there's some people who are like want to be part of it, but are just like have negative time, but are like are around if somebody's like really wants to pull the fire alarm and need some help or call in a real favor. And so you want to kind of accommodate all those people. So like for us, like we've developed a few different programs where we have some kind of formal like deal sourcing agreements with people in the collective. We're just this year going to start to bring up some more like digital platforms like Slack channels, things like that, for an online directory for people to kind of opt into levels of information sharing or subject matter expertise, how they're interested in supporting the portfolio. We're also going to start running these little like studios, like study groups this year too, where groups of people every like quarter are going to gather around a specific topic and do some collective research on them and curate a few talks. We're doing one on AI and CAD. We're doing another one on mushrooms that'll be kind of like fun, kind of collective learning experiences that we'll be publishing some collateral from and some sort of like multimedia research reports that I'm pretty excited about. So there's some activities like that would kind of hit different parts of that, like those motivations and Venn diagrams for people that allow some like asynchronous, infrequent interaction that are hopefully still meaningful for people, and then I think align really well with the like economic engine of like sourcing investment opportunities and supporting portfolio companies.
How do you pick the topics?
Kind of with like whatever seems interesting at the time. Like you want something
AI, shrooms.
Yeah. Like, it's one of those things like when something like ends up on the sticky board as like a sticky note as an option, that you start like hearing more and more about it in different places, and you're like, oh, we got to do that one now or something. And,
So given the very different verticals that your companies sort of live in, what would you say is the common thread between them, aside being like a creative technologist? Like, what does that actually mean? And how do you know like when a founder actually jumps out at you for really fitting into the persona that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really just the bread and butter fundamentals of what makes a good venture-backed company. I think when we really start to get into the like analysis and critique of a particular pitch, I mean, I think we usually invest because of like team, and market opportunity. Like it's so much about the founding team for us. We really look for people that have some unique earned insight. And for that to be truly rare, I think it usually comes out of some interdisciplinary background where it's a combination of skills and experiences that kind of gave them a special insight that's true and valuable, but also maybe not that many people have. And so we're definitely looking for that. But if anything's a good idea, there's usually a few people doing it, and so they really need to be excellent so that they're the ones to like win pursuing that idea. I think we often joke that like every good idea becomes an execution play at some point, and so you want somebody that's going to like win in that mode too. So we really think deeply about that. I think it's still really hard to hire these days. And I think also painting that like vision to guide work in a team is really important. So I think people that communicate really clearly, paint inspirational stories is something that we really look for, that I think our type of founder is especially well suited for as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those aspects. We really treat it as almost like a hiring process, right? Like we go very deep on kind of founder personalities and background and make sure that we believe they're like, one of the only people in the world that are best suited to pursue this particular idea. And then obviously on the market side too, like you need some level of success to like truly make the venture fund economics work as well too. So, we're definitely looking for people that are kind of tackling the like many billions, if not tens of billions of dollar market opportunity for the company that they're pursuing, and really have like the aspiration to build something big as well too. I think people that are only motivated by financial outcomes are sometimes not as successful as people that are really mission driven, who happen to like have their mission aligned with great business models. And I think they tend to be the ones that are in it for the long haul, can really like survive the ups and downs of startup life. So we look for that quite a bit too.
I would love your thoughts on one theme that we have at Omni is the balance of convergent thinkers and divergent thinkers. Just like putting us as examples, Simon is an incredible divergent thinker, and I'm a very strong convergent thinker, but it's hard for me to break into the other realm. Do you think it's required? Maybe I can define each of them. So divergent thinking is basically being able to relate completely disparate topics and understand how they relate to create completely new fields and completely new ideas. And it sounds like that's one of the things that you prioritize heavily. And then convergent thinking is taking that idea and actually driving it through to the finish line. Do you have any thoughts on like, does one person need to be able to encapsulate both in order for it to be an investable startup for you? Or do you have folks in your network that you can like create teams to balance both sides? Like, tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, I think you definitely need to be able to do both over time to have a successful company for sure. And I've seen people that can do both of those things well at once, or at least switch between them in their head. So that can be rare, but I think that's like a perfect place for there to be teamwork sometimes too. I think that those being really excellent at those like tend to like cluster into different people, I think. And so I think that's great. That like you guys did, like represent like other ends of that spectrum, and I think
it's good to have a balance.
We're looking for that in founding teams as well too.
Totally. For me, like divergent thinking is such a like foreign concept. I've only like really come to know it viscerally through working with Simon for so long. And I'm wondering, given your experience with all of your founders, Tyler, do all of them have really diverse backgrounds to be a divergent thinker? Like Simon has had an incredible like backstory that has many varied twists and turns, and I think that has allowed him also to go to that realm. But like for founders that are aspiring divergent thinkers, like have you noticed any trends or like correlations between the founders that you've backed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, to some degree, like every human is different too, right? Like even if people's like don't have as many like entries on their LinkedIn doesn't mean they didn't live like a fully textured, diverse life too. So there's a lot that like exists outside of a resume for people, but I do think that people that really like followed curiosity and weren't like necessarily like credential seekers all the time, but like were truly like hungry to learn new things, or really hungry to be excellent or best in their field, or to have an impact around them. I think that feels like the key to me.
I think that's actually quite different than the typical VC founder persona, like the person that went straight from high school to Stanford to like starting a business at 22. Like there's so much more color that can really change the startup experience, I think, for founders. And if you have such a unilateral view on the world, I wonder would you say that that limits your ability to create a successful company?
I'm not sure. I mean, you just have to take everyone as individuals. Like there's those kids that started school, like business out of Stanford, that are like great entrepreneurs. Like, and we back some of them too. Like they're out there too. You just sort of have to take everybody as an individual, I think.
And understand like, yeah, them as a person. I love you take founder first to a whole new level. I feel like most people that we've been speaking with in the field, like, of course, care about the background and like, how driven they are and like what they've overcome to get to where they are today. But I feel like you take that 2 levels deeper in understanding like where they actually want their lives to be going, where they want the world and the world trajectory to be going. It's really, really impactful.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate you like picking up on that.
Yeah.
Glad that's
so I guess to that end, I have a statement that we can debate. Is being a good VC the same as being a good pattern matcher? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give the "it depends" answer, but like, I think it definitely can be. I mean, I think that there's an obvious skill to giving people advice, like based on what you've seen in the past, that kind of like looks around corners and helps people avoid mistakes and help prioritize what's important in their company. I do believe that like history like can be instructive, and we can learn things from history too. So I think it's absolutely valuable, but you always have to remind yourself that you're doing a new thing too, right? Like you have to balance that with, if you just do things based on what works and what's worked and what hasn't in the past, like you're not going to do the new thing well all the time. And so I think you always just have to be balancing that with like also like beginner's mindset of like kind of just being in the moment and following your instincts around what's interesting, what feels right too. I think you have to be able to switch between both of those things, or like surround yourself with people that like represent those different like viewpoints, and let that like tension between them like help guide the decision making process.
Yeah, I feel a constant dichotomy between in order to be recognized as a good VC, you need to perform at the top level in returns consistently over a very long period of time. But in order to achieve that, it feels like you have to always be changing. So there's no way, like in any other career, I feel like consistency to your and honing in on your specific craft feels like a narrowing. But in VC, I feel like it's actually quite divergent. And I wonder if I guess that does lend to more of a generalist way of thinking though, right? Like you can't box in, like no specific single line is going to get you to be like successful in VC. You kind of have to understand the entire market at all times in order to really get there. Is that true? This is going against our own thesis right now. I would love to like get more insights from you.
Totally. I mean, I think there are like narrow categories that are, or there may be like a little bit more like evergreen too, right? So if you're working on like medical devices or financial products or marketplaces, like some of those things, there's some real strategic dynamics and interesting like patterns and how a lot of those things have developed over the years that I think you could like live in those like silos and be like quite successful for a long time too. So so I don't think it necessarily has to be generalist, but you do need to be able to find the new macro waves and figure out where there's opportunity there. I think that's part of the whole business. the time scales are real though, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
I think like to really have proof points around a strategy working out, it just takes a lot of time, and that's like a fundamental difficulty. How
do you think about timescales in the companies that you are working with? It sounds like I completely agree with what you mentioned, in that people that are creating something that's fundamentally new, there's no category, there's no name for like the type of business they're building yet, because that means that it hasn't even been forged yet. That's the time to get involved, is like when it's very, very nascent. But then how do you predict the time scale for returns in those types of industries? And is that something that you try to encourage your founders to converge on, or is there like an expectation that, you know, it takes as long as it takes? Like, how do you work with your founders in that regard?
We really try to take the long view and make that explicit with people. Like we always want people to be like going for the biggest impact possible. So yeah, we try to get aligned with people on that up front, and understand their motivation to do that. But yeah, we try to stay as you know, long-term focused as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think, you know, it's basically a law of nature that, you know, venture returns are largely, you know, driven by the size of the winners, not the number of winners. There's some exceptions, and that's, we should always be like critical of that too. And I think we all like aspire to a good batting average. We you know, we just care a lot about that. But yeah, you really want people to be going along as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. I think, how do you balance that with having a fund one? This is something that like us as a fund one as well, we're trying to figure out, because typically you don't get to a fund two unless you show returns from your fund one. If that's a 10-year time frame, it doesn't quite align with like creating a life with and career with venture. Like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think you like have to index on the leading indicators, right? I think like the founder quality is really important. Just doing what you said you were going to do as far as investment model, check size, target ownership, just as showing that you're doing kind of like the right stage, the right business model, investments, and that you're building a portfolio that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are really, you know, some of the leading indicators. And you know, if you get a good number of like a few early step ups that show some trajectory, I think that's good too. And but yeah, you're really looking for those like leading indicators that are directional, because you're not going to have real returns yet.
Yeah. And I guess to your point of like building the bigger brand, the bigger picture for like impacting the world in the long game, you can't focus on the short-term wins. And if you set that expectation up front, it at least keeps your LPs happy, and at least you're doing what you said you're going to do from the onset.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, you have to treat them with like a you know, immense respect too, and try to share, not just be like, trust us, like, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to tell convincing stories around that,
Mm-hmm.
going in the right direction.
Yeah. So for folks that are in venture, and they're trying to decide between narrowing in and being more niche versus having a larger worldview and being open to exploring more verticals, what would your advice be in terms of like crafting which strategy would be best for you?
Yeah. I think what I'm doing is mostly like right for me. And you know, so I think it's a lot about like leaning into your strengths, right? I think like that philosophy of understanding what you're really great at and trying to figure out how to do more and more of that and apply that as best you can is really the key. And so like wherever that leads you to, I think some people's natural proclivities would lead them to different strategies. And I think it's just keying into that.
Mm-hmm. Do you, it sounds like, yeah, so go for it, Simon.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just curious, like, how much would you say, how do you weight leaning into your strengths versus differentiation? Like, because I think you're also differentiated. Was that intentional, or was that just because leaning into your strengths led to differentiation?
Yeah. No, you want to like, ideally you want to do both. So yeah, I think we tried to do both, and maybe we were lucky that both of those things lined up.
how far from your initial concept of the fund did you land to like when you closed the fund?
Pretty close. Like, yeah, pretty close. Yeah. Yep. We like played
Right.
around with some different names, but like that was really like that was really I think the strategy was pretty focused. Like we knew we wanted to keep the same stage and kind of lead investment model as what we've been doing at Bolt for 3 funds. We wanted to keep that exactly the same, and wanted this kind of more broader positioning that we felt like was more kind of authentic to our team and a better strategy going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
But I think if you had to choose one of those, like you can't be differentiated and not lean into your strengths. Like that's going to be
True.
bad. Right? Like you can't just like be a follower.
Recipe for disaster.
Like, that's not good. And, I think being true to your strengths and not being differentiated can be great too. I think it's always it's always better to be good than different if you have to pick one.
And I think that this is what's interesting about Balcons is because like inherently, I think the natural thought is lean into your strengths, make that your niche. Okay, now you're a niche fund. But you managed to kind of take that one step further, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, our one of our sort of like other organizations that I think do this well is record labels to a certain degree. I think like record labels often curate artists and help them produce really meaningful work. They're oftentimes from a variety of genres, but sort of are kind of like click in the same like world building place to some degree too. And I think that's kind of what we like aspire to, being this umbrella that makes sense, but then can kind of accommodate a plurality of visions and companies underneath it.
I've never heard the analogy of a VC firm to a record label, and I love that. It's you wouldn't have, I don't know, I've never heard that before. It's really awesome.
Totally.
What other lessons do you pull from like your experience, I guess, like living in the music industry, even back from your college days with like radio? Like, are there other things that maybe like around community building or something that like have been playing into Balcons today?
A little bit maybe, but I mean, it's probably like a little bit more of a stretch. It's probably just following curiosity and like chasing joy, I think is a really kind of like fundamental piece. I think a lot of music communities really understand that it's the whole scene and not just like the artist on stage, right? It's like as much the people in the audience or the people dancing or the people making the posters, and it's the whole community and ecosystem around that really makes something special. And I think that's something we're really trying to key in on with the fund as well too. We talk a lot about like ecosystem versus ecosystem. I think there's, in the startup world, there's a lot of like revisionist history of like talking about like how that single founder was like the idea emerged like fully formed from their heads, and weren't we all so smart for picking them back in the day, which is like is true in some cases too, but we really like a lot more talking about like the scenes that things develop from, like more like founding teams than just the founders, and I think like the reality of most people's like lived startup experiences are quite different.
So to that end, I mean, everything is shaped by community to a sense. Like it's never a single idea by a single person that like makes a success. There's so many things, even in the founder's journey, that influence. How do you curate community within your portfolio? Like if you have founders that are in such different areas, like how are learning shared across companies? Totally.
We're just a year into it, so we're like kind of figuring that out as we go, like the airplanes getting built. We have quarterly what we call sync calls, where like the whole collective is invited and gets on, and we kind of share new investments, let founders kind of like introduce themselves and explain what they're working on. Last fall, we just did our first annual meeting at the like recently renovated Hotel Chelsea in New York, which was like really amazing like venue to get everyone together, and had kind of like normal conference style, like people get up and talk about what they're working on, but more from just a raw, like, this is the work that's happening, the things we're struggling with, not as much of like from like a pitch perspective per se. And that was a really nice atmosphere for people to connect and talk about what they're working on. We have like, we've got people in the portfolio that are like mutual customers of each other, and really comparing notes on how they're building their companies. And that's kind of like the maybe the obvious natural stuff you need to do, and you kind of just want to set the right tone and environment for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Everything that you've mentioned so far in terms of the way that you create community is allowing them to thrive in creativity in a way. Like, it's setting up the parameters for it to happen, but not actually forcing anything to occur. It's a really interesting way to think about, I guess, all aspects of running a fund too. It's like you're putting everything in place for success. I guess also leans to parenting in a way too. It's like you're putting all of the buckets in place for the thriving to occur. You can't like light a match and just like throw it on a fire and say, look, we're now thriving, but like you kind of have to like create the environment. It's a really, I don't know. It's a really interesting way. I haven't thought about it this way before.
Yeah. But also at the end of the day, we're all working in like hyper, time constrained, like resource tight startups too. So like you have to be able to be creative, but then like have guardrails around that, because like you've got to be like hyper prioritized, laser focus on what's important, but being kind of open minded within those bounds too. So it really is something you have to get good at, because if you don't, it's a shit show too. Like,
totally.
It has to also be highly organized.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Tyler, this has been a fantastic conversation. You really opened up my mind in like so many different ways outside of the typical VC realm. We have one final question for you. And that question is, who has been the most impactful person in your career and why?
Yeah, I would probably, there's lots of people I could pick from, from colleagues to friends. I would probably pick my grandpa, actually, though, as my mom's dad. He was just always actually like an early technology adopter in my life. So like the very first computer I had was like a hand-me-down like Mac Plus from him, like black and white one that happened to have HyperCard on it. And so I just learned to program by like digging around in HyperCard and like making flipbooks and video games myself. And I think I had seen some other like little stacks that he made himself, and that just like turned me on to like the fact that I could like make these things and not just like consume them too. So that was like super influential. Like he did genealogy as a hobby, and was like the first person I knew that was online, because he was trading emails with other like researchers in other parts of the country. And so he was just super interesting, and just a very like independent creative thinker too. He was a music teacher. He was in like in the band in the Army in World War II, and just like always loved to talk about creativity and music with me on the side, and would send me birthday cards every year that were collections of clip art and funny things like that too. Just like he was just a very kind of inspirational person, and how he followed his interests even when he was later in life, and just like keyed into some interesting new technology tools and ways of thinking that I don't know that I would have gotten exposed to in the same way otherwise.
That is one of my favorites that we've heard on this podcast. Cheers to him. That was so fantastic. Cheers. Thanks for sharing, Tyler.
Cheers. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Tyler. It's been awesome and really great to connect and hear a little bit more in depth about some of your stories. And thanks for everyone for listening today. This was Beers with VCs with Tyler Minty. Thanks so much. Happy Friday, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Next time. Bye.